the Blitz buggy and said, that's the weight requirement, 1,850 pounds.
3 more weeks of heavy-handed testing revealed that the Bantam design was on target. If a part or system on the Blitz buggy did fail during testing, Army mechanics found they could be repaired easily. Bantam was given the green light to build a total of 72 Blitz buggies for further Army evaluation. But the exceptional performance of the Bantam prototype had not escaped the interest of Willys Overland. With Bantam's blueprints in hand, Barney Roos went about the task of building his prototype, adopting much of the basic design methodology he found in the Bantam blueprints. On November 13, 1940, the completed Willys prototype, designated the Willys Quad, was delivered to the Army. Not surprisingly, the Willys Quad bore a striking resemblance to the Bantam Blitz buggy, much to the indignation of Carl Probst and his team. The Army, claiming that these new vehicles were their property, asserted that they could share their designs with whomever they pleased. Not wanting to jeopardize a lucrative government contract, Probst and Bantam chose not to force the issue. Although similar to the Blitz buggy in appearance, the Willys Quad benefited from several improvements, which Barney Roos had included to overcome a number of the Bantam vehicle's most egregious shortcomings. Barney chose the Willys Go Devil engine, a production unit from the Willys automobile that boasted more power and torque than Bantam's Continental engine. The Quad was stronger and more substantial in overall construction, which ultimately led, however, to a problem for Roos. The same problem which had confronted Carl Probst and the Blitz buggy. The Quad was seriously overweight.
The problem that the Willys Overland Barney Roos had was that they were somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,100 pounds. They were 300 pounds overweight. They had to take their vehicle and go back because the new specification said it can't weigh more than 1,850 pounds. They went back and looked at cotter keys, length of bolts. They cut bolts down. They shaved excess weight off of parts. They even went so far as to specify just 1 coat of paint on the vehicle because 2 would put it over the spec. When they got done, they were actually under 7 ounces to the weight requirement, so they cut it pretty close.
Meanwhile, Ford had little legwork to do in designing and fabricating their LRV. By now, Bantam and Willys Overland had shown the way. All that was left for Ford to do was build a derivative of what the Army had already seen and endorsed. The Ford GPW, soon to be called the GP, completed the triumvirate of LRVs that would be called upon to fulfill the Army's needs for a multi-purpose 4x4. Based heavily on its 2 predecessors, the GP, under agreement with Willys, would ultimately come equipped with the more powerful Willys engine, rather than the agricultural Fordson tractor engine originally used in the first prototypes. The Army had stipulated that all 3 manufacturers were to adhere to design uniformity that allowed easy interchangeability of parts. But Henry Ford, stubbornly determined to maintain some semblance of individuality in his products, ordered that each and every part in the Ford GP bear the letter F, right down to each nut and bolt.
No one came close in the weight department. Everyone came close in meeting the payload. They were all obviously quarter-ton 4x4s. They all used basically Dana axles, different engines, different transmissions, and they had pretty much the same basic layout. 2 seats, a driver, steering wheel, hood. They met those requirements. They got a little more complex in the next round of negotiations. They got very specific about different generators, alternators, an axe and a shovel had to be added, driving the weight up, but those were all things that the Army wanted to make them more useful out in the field.
By March 1941, with war now engulfing most of Europe and the specter of Japanese aggression erupting on the other side of the Pacific, the Army pushed ahead its timetable for having its supply of LRVs up to operational levels. During extensive head-to-head testing at Army installations, where Army personnel were now putting the LRVs through their paces, the Bantam Blitz buggy, the Willys Overland Quad, and the Ford GP were performing admirably. But before the Army was prepared to offer the volume contract for mass production of its LRVs, it would contract with each manufacturer to build a shorter run of 1,500 units. Bantam delivered 1,175 Blitz buggies within months, many of them shipped overseas under the Lend-Lease agreement with Russia and Britain. By the end of the year, Bantam would deliver close to 2,700 LRVs to the Army. However, it would be the largest order for their revolutionary vehicle that Bantam would ever receive from the military. Barney Roos continued to upgrade the Willys Quad, which by now had evolved into the model designation MA. And the MA was quickly winning strong favor with the military establishment.
The Willys was the favorite among the troops because of its engine's power. It could do more things, get out of places quicker, had less breakdowns, and a lot of that we attribute to the fact that Bernie Roos had a policy developing an engine that you had to run at 100 hours, wide open throttle nonstop without anything breaking. That's how it was developed. You think about that, you can have a little more robust design in the engine. But look at what Ford did. They took a basic Fordson tractor engine and put that in. It was used to running on a governor with a constant speed, low RPM. That's what its engine was designed for. Bantam just went out and purchased an off-the-shelf engine from the Continental Motor Company. So the engine is by far and away the biggest part of the Jeep vehicle, and that's what the GIs were so impressed about. It's lightweight, high horsepower, and you could certainly move with it.
With the GIs, the Willys seemed to be more popular. It broke down less frequently. They were more comfortable, easier to drive. They were easier to get in and out of. And when you're loaded down with 80 pounds of gear, getting in and out of a vehicle becomes important. But also, many men claimed they liked the Willys better because you could cannibalize parts from a disabled Willys and use them to restore a partially destroyed Jeep and save that Jeep and reclaim it. They liked the fact that the parts were very quickly and easily removed from damaged Jeeps. This was basically the reason why, from my experience, the Willys was the more favorable, the more popular Jeep.
It was now up to the Army to award the mass production order. Ford and Willys, by now the clear frontrunners, had submitted bids with the expectation that one of them would be awarded the hefty government contract. But the Army wasn't completely sold on any one of the three designs set before them. None of them, at least in the eyes of the military, were perfect. And with questions persisting about Bantam's ability to meet the Army's production requirements, it appeared that the bids submitted by Willys and Ford would be the deciding factors on who would land the deal.
An interesting thing was, at the very end of the bidding on the volume contract, there was a fourth bidder that came in most people aren't aware of. That was the Checker Cab Company. They had a bid, actually they were the low bidder, somewhere around $700, but they were completely disregarded because they had never provided a prototype in any of the testing, and therefore they weren't qualified to bid on this. They kind of threw them out as a latecomer. But that gives you some indication of the range. It usually went from $700 to $780 is the bid on the vehicles for that volume contract.
Ultimately, corporate squabbling and the Army's desire to double-source the project would make winners of both Willys and Ford.
The Army issued bids to all three of the respondents for 15,000 vehicles for extended testing throughout different theaters, also to start developing different strategic plans as to how you would use the Jeep vehicle in wartime. Once they went through that testing, the Army got together and said, this isn't quite what we want. We like some features from each. They like the fenders and hood from the Ford. They love the engine, the power they got from the engine out of the Willys. And Bantam had some unique features as well that they wanted to incorporate. So they rewrote all those specifications and called it an MB. That's what went out and was quoted. When it came back, Willys Overland was the winner in that. They were awarded the contract to build 100,000 or so units at that point in time. Ford Motor Company contested it. It went back and forth several times, again, because of the differing factions on who was best capable of producing these amount of vehicles. Ended up both Ford and Willys produced the vehicles. Ford under license from Willys. They basically copied everything that Willys had designed up to that point, including the engine.
Despite popular belief, Bantam's inability to land the volume contract from the Army did not lead to their immediate bankruptcy. The war had provided Bantam with a profitable source of income from the production of cargo trailers, torpedo motors, and aircraft landing gear, helping the small Pennsylvania company to survive until ending production in 1956. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor abruptly launched the United States into World War II. With the standardization of the Army's newest vehicle now achieved, serious production of this multi-talented workhorse could begin. The Willys MB, reworked and refined by Barney Roos, brought the previous model, the MA, to the level of battlefield readiness the Army had been looking for.
And the differences that they had identified they wanted to see in this new MB was a new type of air filter. It was common with the other vehicles they had out in the field. A 6-volt, 40-amp generator, 15-gallon fuel tank in place of the 10, a military-type battery. The handbrake was moved from the center, to the center from the Ford design because they liked that. You could get to it from either seat. You know, if someone was shot, you know, you could easily pull the handbrake from the passenger seat as well. The double hoop top support from Willys, they liked that because otherwise the top tended to droop down right over your head as you were driving. You know, it didn't tend to keep the water off you as well. Combat lighting with blackout lights, modification steering column and brakes, shock absorbers, and of course the ever-present Pioneer tools consisting of the axe and shovel. That's what became the MB, and that's what they went into production with.
The General Purpose Vehicle, or GPV, as it was now commonly called, would find its way into the hands of thousands of enlisted men and officers in every branch of the military, both on the home front and overseas. And its nomenclature, GPV, was soon to be replaced by the name it would carry forever after.
We were told that it's